Deaf Americans face trials every single day of their lives, especially with police. Jonathan Meister, for example, is a deaf American who was carrying his belongings from a friend's house. They mistook him for a burglar and determined that his attempts to use sign language were aggressive. They began to beat him and taser him and choke him until he fell unconscious. Now, just take a moment to think about how is that okay in any way. This isn't even the only time this has happened to deaf people. There are countless reports where deaf people have been abused by the police just because the police did not know that that person was deaf. They couldn't understand what they were also trying to say either. And according to NBC News, at least 50% of people that die at the hands of the police have a disability of some sort. Police officers should be prepared for anything, especially interactions with deaf people. So, ASL should be required in the police force because many altercations with deaf could have been avoided by simple understanding. Now, the problem we face today is that only a few police officers know about the ASL or the ADA, also known as Americans with Disabilities Act. And it results in police brutality because police don't understand deaf and they see them as coming across as aggressive. Police and the ADA have a compliance stating that interactions with the deaf are to be taught in training, but it is not a main priority for many precincts across the nation. According to Alex Vitale, a sociology professor at Brooklyn College, stated that police police compliance with the ADA provisions has been pretty poor across the board. Now, if they don't even take the time to pay attention or learn that, this means that many police officers aren't even taught about the ADA and how to properly interact with someone who is deaf. This leads to many altercations like the one with Jesse. There have even been instances where deaf people have lost their lives, been abused, harassed, discriminated against by many police officers, just off the fact that they were deaf and cannot be properly understood. And how can you communicate with the police if you're deaf and they don't know ASL? And that's a big problem. Police brutality is never fun to talk about, and everyone has their views, but I think we can all collectively agree that you shouldn't be harassed or abused or discriminated against because something you were born with and cannot control. How is that okay? According to ACLU, Robert Kim was fixing a flat tire on the side of the road and he went into a diabetic episode. A police officer arrived at the scene and Kim was trying to explain that he was deaf, but it wasn't getting through to the police officer. And instead of the police officer calling an ambulance for help to help the guy in a diabetic episode, he called for backup. When backup arrived, they ended up beating him and tasing him several times for failing to respond to their verbal orders. How is that okay in any way? Because you cannot respond to verbal orders if you're deaf, and the only way you can communicate is through the ASL. The ADA is restlessly trying to solve problems such as the one with Kim and the police officer for not only deaf Americans, but all Americans with disabilities. But what steps are they taking and how are we going to be able to apply them so we can prevent these altercations? According to NAD, also known as National Association of the Deaf, social media's focus on police brutality has brought a lot of attention towards the deaf, which is good. It's a step in the right direction because people are starting to realize how great the problem is with the police and the deaf and how many altercations actually happen. As I stated earlier, police officers are supposed to be properly trained to interact with the deaf. But obviously, this hasn't gone anywhere. Either it is because officers are too stubborn to focus on this, or because it isn't properly or isn't actually covered in their training. So, how do you solve a problem like this if the police are required but they don't take it seriously? Steps that law enforcement could take is to properly assess a situation, no matter if they're deaf, whatever. You should be able to properly assess a situation and communicate properly. Half the interactions would stop if that happened. We always hear about police altercations in the news, and half of them could have been prevented with effective communication. Another step that the law enforcement could take would be to emphasize the training that is already required by the ADA and not just skip over it, because you never know, as a police officer, what you're going to encounter. Even though it is rare to come across someone who is deaf, police officers should always be prepared to handle any situation. That is why they're out there in the first place. Is it not? Another step that would be very effective is to not even let officers go on duty or be cleared from the police training without the proper training required by the ADA. This will make sure that every police officer has the proper training and the effective communication that it takes to communicate with deaf people. And then police officers wouldn't be able to say that they didn't know how to properly communicate with someone who happens to be deaf or anybody with a disability. They wouldn't have any excuse. In conclusion, we discussed many reasons why law enforcement should be abiding by the ADA Act. It is already required, as I stated several times, for police to know how to properly communicate with the deaf. So now it's up to the police to actually enforce it. So interactions like the ones we discussed today don't happen anymore. Otherwise, if they don't comply and they don't hold up their end of the bargain, these interactions between law enforcement and the deaf are going to happen over and over again. And it's up to us if we can stop it or not.